friends, it's been a while, but I'm finally back. I spent quite a bit of my weekend optimizing matrix transpose, which is not a typical thing you do on a weekend for fun. And yeah, as you might guess, it was for a school assignment, but I ended up having fun along the way, and I thought it was interesting enough that I decided to make a video on it. And I love to frame it as this analogy of boxes in a storage room, because then I see the two matrices as two very, very difficult customers that just keep throwing out each other's boxes. And I'm over here trying to get them to play nice with each other, to cooperate, be responsible, be safe, so that we can finally transpose this matrix once and for all. And yeah, I'm sounding like a kindergarten teacher, but whatever. I hope that you enjoy this video. And yeah. Imagine that we have a warehouse of boxes. It's a great warehouse. It's huge, it has more boxes than we could ever need. But the not so great part is that we live very far away from this warehouse, and we can only carry one box at a time. Fortunately, we have a small storage room at home so that we don't have to make multiple trips for the same item. The warehouse is main memory, and our storage room is our cache. In order to take full advantage of the storage room, we want to write programs with good locality. By locality, we mean two things: temporal locality and spatial locality. Temporal means time, and it's the assumption that if we need an item from a box, we're very likely to need it again in the near future. Spatial locality, on the other hand, is the assumption that if we need an item from a box, we are very likely to need its fellow items from the same box, also in the near future. Note the emphasis on near future. This is because there's a chance that our boxes in our storage room will get thrown out, which we'll also go over in this video. If our programs have good locality, that means that the boxes we grab for a storage room are more likely to get used, and as a result, we won't have to make so many trips to the warehouse. An example of a program with good locality would be traversing a really small array, because the elements of the array are stored generally in the same quote-unquote box, whereas a program with bad locality would be jumping around very scattered, disparate places in the memory, since you don't really get the benefits of spatial locality from it. Now we'll go a little more into the layout of each box. Each box is the same size and holds the same number of items. To differentiate these boxes, we put a barcode on each box. The box is also known as a cache block, and its barcode are its tag bits. We can also keep track of some extra information about the box, like whether it's in use, which we do through a valid bit, and also whether it's been recently modified, which we do through a dirty bit. The box, combined with all the extra information like its barcode and whether it's use or recently modified, is known as a cache line. I might say cache line and cache block interchangeably, but they both refer to the box. Our storage room consists of some amount of aisles, and each aisle can hold some amount of boxes. These aisles are cache sets, and our boxes are, as you might recall, cache lines. When we want an item from the storage room, how does it work? We don't want to browse through all the aisles, since that would take forever. Usually we associate each box with exactly one aisle. Let's just say that each box has one aisle number that it can ever belong to. And say that given an item, we have a very fast way of getting its aisle number and the barcode of its box. So when we want an item, we walk to the correct aisle number and look for a box with a matching barcode. If we don't see such a box, we have to make the trek all the way to the warehouse to get the box. If the aisle is too full to hold this new box, and this part is important, we throw away one of the older boxes to make room for our new box. So that's how it works at a high level. Now we'll go into more detail about how the aisle number and barcode are obtained, since that will be more important in our discussion of locality. Peeling away our analogy, the items are data in memory, and the warehouse is main memory. When we want to access an item, we look at its memory address, which we'll say is 64 bits long since we're dealing with a 64-bit machine. And we split the bits of this address into sections. The first section are its tag bits, which as you recall was the barcode on the box. The middle section are the set bits, which tells you which cache set it belongs to, or in our analogy, it's the aisle number. And the last section are the block bits, which identifies which item within the box the item is. A question: why are the bits arranged like this? Well, say that you have a small array of some elements, like 4 elements. Since we want good spatial locality, we'll ideally want the elements to be packaged in the same box, so that you can just load one box from memory and you're basically good. Since the elements of arrays are stored next to each other in memory, their addresses tend to be the same for upper bits and different for lower bits, which is why we designate the tag and set bits as the upper bits, so that they get packaged in the same box. As you may observe, when you have larger arrays that you're traversing, the set bits aren't exactly unique, and this is where the issue comes in. And now we talk about matrix transpose. Say that a box can hold 8 items. Your storage room has 32 aisles, and each aisle can only hold one box. Just one. If you ever fetch a new box for an aisle, you basically have to boot the old one out. Now to formalize the problem, your goal is to populate matrix B with the transpose of matrix A. You can assume that the matrices start on the same cache line. So in other words, the first item of matrix A belongs to the same aisle as the first item of matrix B. So when you load a box from matrix A, and then you load a box from the same location of matrix B, you're going to have to throw out your box for matrix A. So given such a limitation, how can you populate matrix B with the transpose of matrix A while making as little trips to the warehouse as you can? First, let's look at the simple solution and see how we can optimize from there. In the simple solution, you would iterate the matrices like a normal person would and copy the rows of matrix A into the columns of matrix B. In terms of readability, this is great, but in terms of cache locality, it doesn't do so hot. When you first access this part of B to copy the first row of A into the first column of B, you load this entire box of 8 items into an aisle. And as you go down this column in B, you load another 8 items into another aisle, and so on. But you never actually get to use these loaded items, because by the time you reach this column and are ready to use this second item in the box you loaded has already been thrown out of the aisle, because a previous access down here uses the same aisle as our box up here, and we ended up having to throw out our box. So to sum up, we have poor spatial locality. We load many items into our storage room, but we never actually get around to using them before they're thrown out. So an improvement we can make is splitting our big matrix into small 8x8 matrices, and then transposing each matrix separately. This does better at spatial locality, since remember that each box holds 8 items, and by having small 8x8 matrices, we are more likely to make use of all items in each box before they're thrown out. And in fact, this was the main improvement that I made, and it more than halved the clock cycles taken for me. One thing that puzzled me though was that the improvement was bigger for larger matrices, but not as much on smaller matrices. The reason, as it turns out, is that in a larger matrix like 1024 by 1024, it has relatively more non-diagonal submatrices than diagonal submatrices. In contrast with 32 by 32, you see that the diagonal to non-diagonal matrix ratio is much higher. And the diagonal matrices cause a ton of trouble. In a big matrix like 1024 by 1024, the pain points that we see with diagonals sort of fade off. Diagonal matrices, these guys, are very problematic, because that's where most of the cache conflicts come from. With matrices along the diagonal, the boxes of A and B tend to collide in the same aisle and kick each other out very, very often, which results in us throwing out a lot of boxes. So we can keep our current approach with non-diagonal matrices, but for diagonal matrices, we have to make some slight modifications. To deal with this, one start we can take is to separate out the aisles. When we transpose the diagonal matrices, we don't directly write the transpose of A into B. Instead, we have an intermediary location. Let's call this BB, and make sure that BB starts on a different cache line than the diagonal matrices in A and B. So first we copy the transpose of 8x8 matrices of A into BB, and then we copy BB into B. And since BB is on a different cache line than A and B, we can avoid the conflicts that we saw earlier. But this modification alone isn't enough, because having BB start on a different cache line doesn't guarantee that we'll have any less collisions. So in addition to this, we also have to look at the individual aisles that each row belongs to, and then see where the conflicts are happening. Let's start with this 8x8 matrix in this top corner of A. And let's just call this baby matrix AA. We have to make sure that when transposing AA into BB, BB doesn't use the same aisles as AA. If the first row of AA maps to aisle 0, its neighbor in A maps to aisle 1, the next neighbor maps to aisle 2, and aisle 3. And then you see that the second row of AA maps to aisle 4. So continuing this pattern, the second row maps to aisle 4, its third row maps to aisle 8, then the fourth row maps to aisle 16, and so on. These are the aisles that we want to avoid in BB because they're occupied by AA. So it's okay for BB to use aisles 1, 2, 3, then skip 4, and then use aisles 5, 6, 7, skip 8, and so on. That's the general gist of how we copy the transpose of A's matrices into BB, and similarly when we copy BB into B. So those are the main optimizations for the diagonal matrices, and by doing this, you get even more performance gains for matrix transpose. If we want to go even further and have further optimizations, we can observe, for example, that the lower triangle of A can be directly copied into B without using BB, and that for the upper triangle of A, we technically only need 4 cache blocks to hold the upper triangle of A, but we ended up using 8 cache blocks. So we can try to squeeze the upper triangle of A into 4 cache blocks for even more performance gains. There were more optimizations that I made, but this video is getting long, and honestly, we could spend all day on this. So I just want to zoom out and focus on the big picture. Low-level optimizations like this only come into play when there is a need. Teams usually don't want to spend resources on this level of optimization since the work is both time-consuming and a little bit tedious. But when the competition can accomplish the same things with less cost, that's when you get the need to improve wherever you can. But most of the time, performance is good enough that we don't need to go to these lengths. So, because of this, I feel like the most important takeaways I got from this exercise are not the specific tricks for optimization, but instead some higher level lessons and patterns. So firstly, it's that some improvements need larger inputs in order for those improvements to be worth it. For us, that would be the example with the 1024 by 1024 versus 32 by 32 matrix, where we saw that the improvement was greater for the bigger matrix than the smaller matrix. This reminded me a lot of granularity control in parallel computing, which is the concept that when you're switching to a parallel solution, you're going to incur some sort of overhead cost. And if this overhead cost outweighs the speed up gain through parallelism, then the resulting execution of your parallel solution may actually be slower than your sequential solution. So granularity control comes in, and it's where You run a parallel solution if the input is big enough that you actually get the benefits of speed up, and otherwise, you switch to a sequential solution when the input gets small to avoid the overhead costs. So, similar to how in parallelism we want the input to be big enough for our benefits to outweigh our overhead, in matrix transpose, we needed the input to be big enough to see the benefits outweigh the cost of the diagonal matrices. The other general lesson I learned was the importance of locality. I think matrix transpose was a really good way of illustrating what locality is and how locality can be improved if we ever need to. In the bigger picture, locality is important due to the widening gap between processor and memory performance, which in short, the processor-memory performance gap means that we are pretty fast when it comes to making calculations with information, but most of our waiting comes from loading and storing information. So we have to be strategic about what kind of information we load and store so that we don't have to do so much waiting. The amazing thing about software is that most of the time we naturally write programs with good enough locality, but in case if we ever need to improve our locality, understanding how all of this works under a hood can be pretty helpful. That's it for today, and after going through all this matrix transpose stuff, I wake up every day feeling super grateful. Like, thank God our cache sets can hold more than one cache block. Holy crap. When your IOs can only hold one box, it's a nightmare. Oh, another takeaway from this video is that when you're sharing an IO with someone else, don't throw out their boxes. Be a good neighbor and just don't throw out their boxes. Yep, that's it. Have a good day.